Good evening, Dr. Lai and the rest of the SEA 303 class. So, in this week, my group and I will be presenting on our topic of the past in the present, the struggle of refugees in Malaysia. This topic will be presented in four parts. First, we will introduce each team member within this group's presentation. Second, we will discuss the main thesis and main questions of this week's topic. Third, we will review all four of the articles assigned to us this week. And finally, we will conclude on the main thesis and discuss our own opinions on it. Our group members and presenters for today include Yang Tianbao, that's me, Yang Yuanfeng, Yuan Shuai, Zhang Yanke, Zhao Shuxuan, and Zhen Qitian. So the main thesis or the topic of discussion for this week's presentation is the following. Today, we consider the problem of refugees, in particular, the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia. So, we are to discuss what exactly are the issues with the Rohingya refugees. Should Malaysia do its utmost to protect the rights of the refugees? Why and why not? So these topics and questions will be discussed via article reviews we've done of the four articles of this week, as well as our own opinions formed based on these articles. So without further delay, let's move on to the individual article reviews.
The Rohingya are a Muslim minority who are forced to flee from Myanmar to Malaysia and other neighboring countries. They face a long history of discrimination, persecution, and violence in their home countries, leading many to flee to neighboring countries such as Malaysia. The Rohingyas are considered stateless because the Myanmar government does not recognize them as citizens and denies them basic rights. The article mentioned that due to the wars and unfair policies, the Rohingyas has migrated four times. After experiencing this oppression and unfair treatment, the living environment of the Rohingyas has become more dangerous. The Rohingyas crisis has a roots in Myanmar's complex history of ethnic and religious tensions. Over the past few decades, there has been countless terrorist attacks against the Rohingyas community, policies change, and the discriminatory practices by the Myanmar government, as well as incidents of ethnic violence, has contributed to the deteriorating situation for the Rohingyas. This has attracted international attention. This action has been described by some as ethnic cleansing or even genocide. One of the reasons is that their country is too poor and the Rohingya cannot have a good living environment such as medical care, education, and employment. Such harsh, suffocating living conditions and unfair treatment has forced the Rohingyas to flee to neighboring countries, including Malaysia, in search of safety and a better living environment, which is why they come to Malaysia. The Rohingyas people in Malaysia mainly face the following three problems. First, they their identities are not recognized by the law. As the article mentioned, they are stateless people. So Rohingyas refugees without legal status are easily detained and deported by the government. Second, limited access to basic rights. The lack of legal status also limits Rohingyas refugees access to basic rights such as education, healthcare, and formal employment. Most Rohingyas, including children, do not have access to school, resulting in a lack of access to education. Third, discrimination. While there are Malaysia and international organizations providing support to the Rohingya, there are also instances of xenophobia and discrimination. Negative prescription of refugees can lead to social and economy mar- mari- margin, marginalization and prevent their integration into society. I think the problem of Rohingyas is very serious. This requires not only the local government to make changes, but also international assistance, at least to solve their national problem first. A nation needs a sense of belonging. They need a place where they are truly recognized. Thank you.
The Rohingya, a Muslim minority group in western Myanmar, have long faced racial and religious persecution. Although the Rohingya have lived in Myanmar for centuries, they have long suffered from oppression and discrimination in the political, economic, and social spheres. On February 1st, 2021, the Myanmar military launched a coup, overthrew the elected government, and took power. This has led to an unstable political situation. After the establishment of the military government, the military's force and violence made the Rohingya face more serious human rights violations such as being persecuted, killed, raped, arrested, and tortured. As a result, the violence and heightened discrimination brought on by the civil war has forced many Rohingya to leave Myanmar in search of safety. I think the impact of the Myanmar military government on the Rohingya is unfair and painful. The international community should work hard to promote peace and stability in Myanmar, protect the rights and interests of the Rohingya, and help the Rohingya get through this difficult time. Regarding the question, I think the main problem that Rohingya refugees facing is in Malaysia is illegal status. The problem of illegal status will prevent Rohingya refugees from finding legal work, and due to their illegal status, the human rights and the personal safety of Rohingya refugees are not guaranteed by the Malaysian government. I think the Malaysian government should work hard to protect the rights of refugees because if refugees' basic rights are not guaranteed, it may lead them to turn to illegal activities. Then they will harming society. Therefore, in order to maintain social harmony and stability in Malaysia, the Malaysian government should work hard to protect the rights of refugees. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Zhao Shuxuan. My metric number is 160166. The Rohingya people suffer the genocide or the ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, and 183,000 asylum seekers from Myanmar escaped to Malaysia. At present, Malaysia is the largest host of refugees in the Asia. Malaysia is not a party to the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol. In addition, Malaysia didn't officially recognize the non-refoulement principle proposed by the UN Refugee Agency. Thus, it doesn't officially accept refugees and give refugees right to work, to education, and to healthcare. On the one hand, the government of Malaysia indeed has cooperated with the UNHCR to address the problems and provide and has been giving these asylum seekers a card and a Malaysia identity card, which can provide refugees with temporary work chances and basic protect. And the Malaysian humanitarian groups, such as the Rohingya Women Development Network, are working with the community to fight for these refugees for their rights. But on the other hand, in fact, Malaysia doesn't in fact address the Rohingya crisis. There is no real domestic policy related to Rohingya refugees. Malaysia immigration law permits arbitrary and indiscriminate detention of refugees, which is a direct reason of the separation of Rohingya families. And random deportation are always common. For these Rohingya people, deportation to Myanmar is worse than death. Moreover, the most of Rohingya refugees don't have access to formal employment, so that they have to seek jobs in the informal sector, in which exploitation and low wages are common. As a matter of fact, due to a large number of refugees in Malaysia, they have to compete with others for the limited work chances, such as so they need to provide a cheaper labor and therefore the money they earn from the informal sector hardly sustain themselves and their families. And at the same time, there are some researches shows that Rohingya refugees can be a solution of Malaysian labor shortage, especially in labor-intensive industries such as construction, something like that. Besides, Rohingya are diligent and hardworking, and they are really willing to learn and develop their own professional skills. They are not just passively waiting for help and drain the public resources. Based on all of things that I have mentioned before, I believe that the current policy of Rohingya refugees in Malaysia is a little bit too harsh. I suggest that Malaysia government should all should all need to provide basic protection for these refugees. That's all. Thanks a lot.
Hello, this is Yuan Shuai. I will summarize the CM of the third article and answer the question later. The third article describes the efforts of ASEAN and other organizations to get Myanmar to stop the persecution of its people. ASEAN has repeatedly tried to cooperate with Myanmar's military government, but the junta had stuck to its plan and refused to intervene by ASEAN and other international organizations. Myanmar's junta wants to consolidate its power and position by engaging with ASEAN, not to worry about repercussions of its own violent treatment of its people. ASEAN's member states should also recognize the illegitimacy of the military government, take certain sanctions to put pressure on the military government of Myanmar, and takes initiative to recognize the legitimacy of the National Unity Government of Myanmar to help Myanmar get out of the rule of military government at an early date. In my opinion, most of the suffering of the Myanmar people comes from the illegal rules of military government. So to answer the earlier question of what are the issues with Rohingya refugees, I think that a large part of reason for the Rohingya refugees is that the nature of military government in Myanmar is essentially illegitimate and undemocratic. And the ultimate goal of the military government is to achieve a high concentration of power in Myanmar. No matter whether Malaysia government accept Rohingya refugees or not, it cannot fundamentally solve the problem, which is only temporary. The real solution of the Rohingya refugees problem requires ethnic reform within Myanmar and the pressure from other international organizations on the illegality of Myanmar's military government to encourage the establish a democratic government. In conclusion, I hope that through the joint efforts of the Myanmar's people and the international organizations, the issue of Rohingya refugees can be resolved at an early date, and the Myanmar's people can get rid of the unreasonable rule of the military government at an early date.
Hello everyone, my name is Xiang Yuanfeng and I gonna do the presentation about the last material with Alex. And about the material, it is an audio recording about the Malaysian government wants to proceed with the proposal to close the office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugee in Malaysia. Because the Malaysian government wants to transition the role of the UNHCR to internal government agents and once the management of the asylum to be done without foreign intervention. But from the perspective of the UNHCR, it is hard for Malay to take over the role with the current refugee system because there are nearly 200,000 asylum-seeking refugees in the UNHCR now, and the Malaysia don't even have its own asylum system and legal framework to help with the refugee. So the Malaysian government is not ready to take over the UNHCR now, even though the government is trying to progress and help the refugee, but they might also want to kick out the UNHCR just for the nationalities reason. So, in my opinion, I wish there will be more communication between the Malaysian government and the refugee and the UN. And the most important thing is the fundamental reason for the existence of the UNHCR is to protect and help with the refugee in Malaysia. So it doesn't matter who is in charge. If Malaysia is really committed to protecting the refugee and wants to have the independent management, I think the government at least need to have the own better silence system and the law before kicking out the help of the UN completely. And that's all. Thank you for listening.
Hi, me again. So my report is also on the article slash podcast. How committed is Malaysia to protecting its refugees? So, like Yang Yuanfen mentioned before, this is mostly a discussion on the current proposal in the Malaysian government of closing the office of UNHCR, or the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Malaysia. So Yang Yuanfen also made some good points and summarized the article, or I guess podcast, very well, because the main points, as it states, is that right now the reason for the proposal is mainly on helping transitioning the role of UNHRC to internal government agencies, which they think that the management of asylum seekers should be done without foreign intervention, like from the UN or other countries. And while I do agree with Yang Yuanfen, as well as a guest speaker in the podcast, that at the moment, Malaysian government is not really ready to completely take over the role of the uh, the UNHCR, since Malaysian laws, especially laws on border control, immigration, as well as refugee sorting, is not really mature or complete enough yet to completely take over UN's job to do these things, especially helping refugees like political activists, their families, those escaping a religious or political persecution, or even those seeking medical help, and placing them into new positions, or helping them with their families. So while I do agree with this main point, I can also see where people proposing to kick out the UN from Malaysia asylum system. I understand where they're coming from, because we do really have to consider Malaysia, from a cultural as well as historical perspective, that it is a ex-colonized country. So I really do understand the nationalist, well, not really nationalist, but harsh, like patriotic thoughts and ideals that, Malaysians should solve Malaysian problems. Everything done in Malaysia should be done by Malaysians instead of, these white first world country, Western country UN officials. So I do understand the sentiment because uh, I come from China, and we do have pretty much the same stance on the Hong Kong issue. Because when England returned Hong Kong to the Chinese government, they done it with a lot of restrictions on how Hong Kong should be governed, and they still do have a hand in how Hong Kong society as well as political systems work. So coming from Chinese person and most people in China thinking that Hong Kong is China. Like, why would you separate that from us? Through your imperialism 100 years ago, and when you return it to us, you're not doing it completely honestly, and you're not doing it in the interest of people of China and in Hong Kong. So yeah, it's kind of similar to how Malaysian proponents of this proposal of kicking out the UNHCR and letting Malaysian government take over this job. I understand where they're coming from, but ultimately, ideal is ideal and reality is reality. Like it would be nice if the Malaysian government have enough economic financial power, as well as these well structured political policies in place to help these refugees to find their families, to get better and to find positions in Malaysia to help them start a new life. But that's the thing. It would be nice, but right now we don't have those structures. We don't have those policies. We don't have that power in place right now. So it's unrealistic for the Malaysian government to completely take over this process. So, in a summary, I do agree that Malaysian government should do its best to help these refugees and to do their best to take over this process and make sure they do everything correct by themselves. It's still not very realistic. I think they should since the UN has like a mature and very well tested policies and structure in place, we might as well use them for now, before we come up with something that's better. And yes, to go back to the earlier questions in our thesis, should Malaysian government, try its hardest to help the refugees? I think the answer is, of course, morally, definitely yes. But yeah, but in terms of realistically, I do think that we do the best to our abilities. As in, if I'm in a Malaysian's shoe, I would think Malaysians come first. We have to make sure our own people, that if I was a Malaysian, that our own people has enough food to eat, feed their families properly, and enjoy all the social benefits our government can afford. And beyond that, use the leftover finances and political and social power to help these refugees to the best of our abilities. Thank you. So, in conclusion, I guess the story of the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia or anywhere else is a story of a people without a nation, without a home, and without an identity. It is a pity that these people who've lived in and born in Myanmar are not recognized by their government as official citizens. And we're not even talking about them not receiving the benefits of a citizen should have, but they are actively just persecuted by the government in Myanmar, as well as different civil groups, like mostly Buddhist groups within Myanmar. And when they come to Malaysia, either by boats or by land, the Malaysian government also do not officially recognize these refugees and do not, any official capacity, to help them. for example, grant them like a residency or grant them permanent citizenship. Instead, we see a lot of them are forced into these manual labors and work on farms in very terrible conditions and probably for very low pay just to survive and feed their families. And we do indeed see that a lot of times, they are not really welcome here by the local people and especially the local government. So it's a very difficult situation right now, especially with this year's Myanmar's military takeover. Things are just getting worse and worse for the Rohingyas. So our group, after we read all these articles and did some of the research on our own, we do really feel like Malaysia should do its utmost to protect the rights of the refugees, not just the Rohingyas, but also any other political refugees from the SEA countries that we can help. Because yes, morally it is a correct thing to do, but also it would do wonders for Malaysia's international reputation, since Malaysia do uphold itself as one of the more advanced countries of the SEA, along with Singapore. So I think if we want to consider ourselves as an advanced civilization that is leaning towards democratic society, we should, do the right thing and do the humane thing and help the Rohingya refugees as well as any other groups of refugees by giving them steady job positions, maybe provide them with good living conditions, as well as considering granting them, if not citizenship, then at least some residency. Well, there it is. We have come to the end of this presentation for our weekly topic. We hope we have made everything in our thesis and our article reviews clear. Thank you all very much for taking the time to listening to our presentation. Have a great one.